Hey everyone, welcome back to Sujanta Real Estate. So today I wanted to talk about renting because renting is something that a lot of people my age do when they do move out just because, there's still student loans, there's still other debt, but they want to move out of their home, be closer to their work. So they rent instead of buy. So in today's video, I will be talking more about renting and giving you some pretty valuable information that I think you should know. The first thing that you should note is that it is very important if you are looking for a place to rent is to talk to a realtor such as myself and get my help, because that way everything will be legalized, all the paperwork will be in order instead of it being kind of an under the table rental, and that way you will be protected by the Residential Tenancy Act in case the landlord does anything like illegal to you, such as an unfair rent hike, unlawful eviction, stuff like that. It is very important to have it legalized and all the documentation in place because it will set out the foundation for the relationship. For example, it has all the responsibilities for both parties, including how much you have to pay, when you have to pay, how long the lease term is. Is it a year? Is it month to month? So, getting on that, there are actually two types of tenancies that can occur. Number one, there is a fixed term tenancy, which pretty much there is a specific time that the tenant is supposed to stay in the landlord's property for. For example, the most common one is a 1 year tenancy. And there is another one that is called periodic tenancy. So it is for also a specific amount of time, but it is for an indefinite period. That means automatically, as soon as the tenancy expires, it automatically renews for the same amount of time. This is usually called month-to-month tenancy because the tenancy for the fixed period is 1 month, but it is an indefinite amount of time because every month the month-to-month tenancy renews until you do give a 60-day notice of termination. And if you are worried about the costs, you have nothing to worry about because it actually costs nothing to you. We actually get paid by the landlord as part of the commission. So it is pretty much an absolutely free service to you, and it only has benefits. So since I already touched on the Residential Tenancy Act slightly, I will be explaining it a little bit further. Pretty much this is an act by the government in order to help protect tenants from landlords for unlawful actions taken against them. For example, there are a lot of landlords that do not like pets in their property because obviously they can destroy the rooms, they can destroy the walls, they can have accidents, pee on the floor, which kind of ruins the flooring. But this is actually illegal through the Residential Tenancy Act. So if the landlord does try to forcefully evict you because you do have a pet, you can actually go to this board. It's called the Landlord Tenant Board, which pretty much handles all the disputes and conflicts between the landlord and the tenant. And if you do win your case, you will be able to get compensation for the problem. But you also have to keep in mind that this might not be the best idea because if there is conflict or dispute between the landlord and yourself, there might be some animosity, there might be some mistreatment, stuff like that. So you just gotta be careful and tread carefully. Also, the Residential Tenancy Act actually helps protect the tenant from unlawful rent hikes. So pretty much the inflation of the rent prices on the market compared to how much they're allowed to increase your rent by, they actually vary significantly, especially because the supply is low, demand is high. So on the open market, the landlord will actually be able to get a lot more money than they would be getting by keeping an older tenant just because of the rate of growth. And usually a lawful increase would be less than 2%, but it varies year to year, and it will be on the Ontario government website. They post it every year, like the percentage that the landlord is able to increase the rent by. This act also deals with things like having quiet possession of the property, so you can't have a landlord keep coming to your property without a 24-hour notice. Your landlord can't keep disturbing you and pestering you for stuff because you will be protected by this act. And it also sets out the amount of days that you are actually required to give notice before termination of a lease by either the landlord or the tenant himself or herself. This is to protect both parties because you don't want the landlord to forcefully evict you without notice, and then all of a sudden you're just on the street without a home. So they must give you at least a 60-day notice before they are allowed to evict you. And on the other hand, a tenant is not just allowed to up and leave the property and not pay rent. They must also give a 60-day notice so the landlord has time to, remarket the property and try to find a new tenant. So under the Residential Tenancy Act and the Ontario Human Rights Code, the landlord actually has the right to ask for an employment letter, for a credit check, past landlord references. This is to help ensure payment for the landlord, and it's like security for them, so everything there is legal and they are allowed to ask you that if you do apply to rent their place. And usually, like when you buy, you have to put a down payment. When you do rent, you do have to put down a deposit, which is like legal, like they're allowed to ask for it, the landlord. It's usually called first and last, which is first and last month's rent. So the first month's rent they will take and they will use that to pay your first month's rent, and they keep your last month's rent, and they're supposed to keep it in a trust account where they actually are not allowed to earn interest on your deposit. And if they do earn interest on your deposit, you have the right to ask for that interest back. So the Residential Tenancy Act and renting in general, there are actually a lot of in and outs that are associated with it that people actually don't think about or don't consider. Those were just some of the few key points that I thought were important and that people should actually know. So I just want to thank everyone for watching my video. I hope it was useful and informative. If you did like the video, please like and subscribe.